Hi everyone, this is Ollie from MagicHands Hobbies and welcome to the first in a new series where I'll be running through some of the basic techniques that a hobbyist or miniature painter could add to their arsenal of tools. We'll be starting with dry brushing, talking about what it is, what you might want to use it for, materials required and its pros and cons. So what is dry brushing? Well, put simply, it is a means of picking up details on a surface by using paint sparingly across the raised areas and leaving portions of the recesses in their original state. That didn't sound very simple at all, but that's effectively what it is. I'm going to demonstrate on this Warhammer Fantasy miniature how to dry brush, but first let's take a look at the brushes and what you will need to use. A regular miniature paintbrush will not suffice, and any that you use will end up being destroyed. It will lose its point, the bristles will become separated, and it will never be the same again. Do not use your detail brushes or regular brushes for this technique, you will regret it. On the other hand, if you have any old and already abused brushes, then they may be of some use. Generally speaking, the bigger the head of the brush, the easier it will be to dry brush, but that is obviously in proportion to the size of the area that you are trying to paint. So it would be worth having a number of different sized brushes in your arsenal. There are dedicated brushes available on the market, and that's fine, but if you are on a budget, some cheap makeup brushes will also suffice. Sets can contain various sizes, but the one I also went and bought one for large pieces of terrain. This would be no good whatsoever for a small miniature. The method of dry brushing is quite simple, but it can take time to get right. You can use it in different ways. For example, you could use it by brushing from top to bottom only, providing a zenithal type highlight. I'm going to dry brush over this entire model in order to demonstrate the process. First of all, you'll need to load your brush with paint. Then you'll need to remove the majority of it. Otherwise you'll end up just painting the model as normal. To achieve this, take your brush and swirl it into a dry paper towel. While this is removing a lot of the paint, it is also working the paint into the bristles. This process removes the majority of the medium and leaves the pigments on the bristles. Then you can move to the model. A light sweeping motion is required so that the bristles are gliding over the raised surfaces of the model, catching the details and leaving the recesses. Testing with your brush onto a surface, the back of your hand, or even a texture box. If you refer to MS Paints, he created an item called a texture box where he can test out dry brushing before he actually applies it on the model. It's a good idea to do it, to test the brush that is, because what you don't want to do is end up with too much paint. You saw earlier that I ended up wiping across the top. It was too much paint. I went back to the tissue, wiped some off. But you can see you can get very quickly a very nice result across the whole model, if I can get it to focus. Downside is this method does produce a very chalky colour. It will also need protecting with a varnish should you decide to continue dry brushing over the top of it. I'm now going to move on and put some colour on the model. Generally speaking, if you're going to be dry brushing as a technique, you wouldn't dry brush underneath and then paint over the top. This is just a different way rather than grabbing a spare model. So I've applied some brown, so a base colour. I'm going to come along with a lighter one, a smaller dry brush, and just generally same method, lightly going over the top, working up some additional mid-tones and just working my way around the model. I've sped up the footage to try and make it a bit easier to see, and when it's shaking that's me removing the paint off the brush. You may find that in order to get the saturation of the colour you have to go over it a couple of times. It's not necessarily a problem, but you will see later on in this video that I end up having to protect the paint with the varnish, and that is simply because I'm erasing the paint from underneath it. As I said earlier, by doing this method you're removing the medium, which is also acting as effectively a glue holding the paint onto the model. I might be wrong with that. I'm pretty sure I'm correct, but you know, if I'm incorrect, someone let me know in the comments. Now, as you're adding or bringing up the highlights, you want to brush in smaller and smaller areas. It's not very easy to demonstrate on this miniature. Maybe I've just got the technique wrong, but you'll get the general idea by the time I come to the end of the model. It's going to work up on some skin. One thing to bear in mind when you are dry brushing is obviously if you're trying to do the majority of the model by dry brushing, especially on a miniature of this size, you're going to be catching areas that you've already painted, and that may not be a good thing. You could use some masking putty or blue tack or any kind of tape or things like that. So you can see I've switched to a much smaller brush and I'm working top down, and the idea is I'm trying to catch the edges of the muscles, and you can see it's working out quite nicely. The face is a bit of a pain, the colours are interfering with the beard, but I don't think it affects it so much that it is a problem. Okay, moving on to the final highlight for the skin, and now we're just trying to catch the highest points of the muscles and the face. I end up actually using this all over the beard and the hair, because it actually turns out to be a very nice final highlight on there as well. Right, so I have now coated all of the metal parts in black. Black's a good place to start if you want to use dry brushing to produce metal. I'm going to use Gunmetal by Vallejo Game Color. This is quite a dark silver, but regardless of the fact that it's dark, I'm going to apply this across all the surfaces, including the flat surfaces. Now, this will mean that it produces a nice brushed feel to the steel, as well as catching more paint on the corners, therefore creating a highlight. I've worked my way all the way around the clothes and the armour, and now we're moving up to chainmail silver. And again, same process as before. we're going to work on the top of the model, working our way down, but now we're focusing more on trying to catch the edges. Trying to make sure I don't hit the beard and the hair. Obviously you don't want to undo what you've already done. Trying to catch the broader, flatter areas, but only from the top. And then going into the chainmail itself. Looking okay so far. I have done better in the past. Now we're going to put some gold effect on, starting with brassy brass and just filling in some of the areas. I'm using somewhere between a dry brush and a stipple for this. Stippling will be covered in another video. Okay, looking good so far. Moving on to a highlight, Glorious Gold. We're going to apply this in selected areas, trying to make it look like light is catching on the gold. Apologies for the focus, my hand appears to be taking the limelight here. The model isn't glued into the base, as you can see it wobbling around. I don't think I ever painted the entire set of this. I forget which one it was, but it was back before the age of Sigmar, and it was orcs and goblins versus dwarves. I think it's something past. If anyone knows, just put it in the comments for me. That'll remind me. I threw the box away ages ago, but I've got every single miniature. I think I've got the rules somewhere. So I worked my way around the model, painted up the pouch, the gloves, even put an object source light on the candle. Not very well, it was just very quick. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this goblin from the same set. I'm going to try and demonstrate over larger areas. We're going to paint the standard that he's holding. We're going to do it in red, but we're going to start dark and work our way up to an orange highlight. I've sped the footage up as fast as I can on this, just to try and cut this video short. This was only supposed to be 5-10 minutes, it's going to be about 15 minutes by the time it's finished. So we're effectively trying to put a base coat down of the initial red, and then we're moving up to the bloody red. And this is going to take several passes to go over. You need to make sure that each layer is dry before you move on. If you don't, it will just rip the paint up from beneath. And as we're moving up and adding the opacity and adding the saturation of the colour, we are focusing on smaller and smaller areas. You saw on the back there that some of the paint was ripping up. I go back and I fix that later using a stippling motion. The alternative way to do it is to put a layer of matte varnish over everything and then continue. Just there, that's where I'm trying to fix the mistake. This is a perfect example of leaving the recesses. The right hand side I could potentially have taken it a bit further closer to the stick, to the pole, but decided not to. So now we're moving on to the final highlight. You've got to be really careful with this. You do not want to overdo it. I've deliberately made sure that there's very little paint on the brush, working my way over the upper edges and the highlights. I hope you've picked something up from this and learnt something. It's been real fun doing this. It's a nice simple video, nice simple technique. Let me know what you want to see in additional videos, what techniques you'd like me to focus on. There are the two models side by side, just demonstrating that you can do a whole model, and then on the larger pieces what it looks like. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, tell your friends, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.